Why did no one notice the way she carried herself? The quiet steadiness, the calm that didn't come from ignorance, but from surviving things most people never would. She sat alone in the crowded mess hall, a woman in a royal blue blouse surrounded by uniforms, yet somehow more composed than any of them. And still, no one looked twice. No one except the man who should have stopped and thought before stepping toward her. Captain Ryan Mitchell's voice cut through the noisy room like a blade scraping metal. "Ma'am, with all due respect, what's your call sign?" He expected a jump, a flinch, an apology. She gave him none of those. Alexis Hartley just kept chewing her lunch, eyes down, pace unbroken. Calm, almost too calm, the kind of calm that made seasoned Marines uneasy without knowing why. Mitchell smiled at his lieutenants, playing to the audience he mistakenly believed he controlled. The smirk of a man who'd never been tested by fire and believed confidence alone made him untouchable. She looked up finally, slowing just enough to be polite. Her eyes held nothing sharp, nothing challenging, just clarity. And yet that clarity made Mitchell falter a fraction of a second before he recovered. He shouldn't have recovered. "I asked your call sign," he repeated, louder this time, as though volume would force her into the box he'd already placed her in. "You're at VMA 214. Black Sheep Squadron. Everyone here has one." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her jacket, sage green, worn, heavy with miles, hung neatly behind her. The patch was right there. The Grim Reaper clutching a busted hydraulic line, dark fluid dripping from skeletal fingers. 2 words stitched beneath it. 2 words that had frozen men braver than Mitchell. But Mitchell didn't look. He never did. To him she was blonde hair, civilian clothes, a woman in blue. He didn't see the bearing, the posture, the quiet readiness. He didn't see the weight she'd carried here. "I don't think we've been introduced," she said softly. Mitchell straightened. "Captain Ryan Mitchell, Squadron Admin Officer. I oversee access and accountability on this base, and I don't recall seeing you on the visitor log." His lieutenants smirked again. They thought he'd trapped her. But Alexis wasn't trapped. She was evaluating, measuring. She could have ended the whole thing by showing her CAC card. One flash of plastic. 10 seconds. But she didn't. Something about the casual dismissal in his tone made her pause, a familiar sting she had felt too many times in briefing rooms and ready bays. Her voice stayed level. "Captain, I'm not here for the brief." Mitchell's smile tightened. He expected embarrassment. Instead, he got composure. And composure felt like defiance to men who needed superiority to breathe. "Look, ma'am," he said, louder now, drawing attention he shouldn't have drawn. "This is a secure facility. The mess hall is for uniformed personnel, dependents, and cleared contractors. I'm going to need to see identification. Dozens of civilians ate here every day. Dozens, unquestioned. But he'd chosen her." Alexis set her fork down with deliberate calm. Not slow, not fast, controlled. "My ID," she said, "is in my jacket. I'm just finishing my lunch." Mitchell pushed his chair back so hard it screeched across the floor, turning heads. "The jacket with the costume patch," he scoffed. "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. Honestly, ma'am, I'm half convinced that patch is fraudulent wear of an insignia." Fraudulent wear, stolen valor. The accusation hit the room harder than he expected. A few Marines paused mid-chew. A corporal choked on water. One of the lieutenants' smirks faltered. Alexis rose slowly, not tall, not imposing, just steady. Her steadiness was what made it terrifying. "Captain," she said calmly, "you have 2 options." Mitchell blinked. No one had ever cut him off like that. "Return to your seat," she continued, "or proceed. But if you proceed, I should warn you, the impact on your career will be significant." Her tone wasn't threatening. It was predictive. Mitchell scoffed again, high, shaky, defensive. "Is that a threat?" "It's a weather forecast." Across the room, Master Gunnery Sergeant Cole froze mid-bite. His eyes had drifted toward the commotion out of habit, expecting the usual officer acting important situation. But then he saw the patch on her jacket. His fork dropped. He'd seen that patch before. Once. In an after-action report heavily redacted, the kind that made your stomach drop because whatever wasn't blacked out was bad enough. Sticky Six. Holy hell. He stood immediately, quiet and slow, like approaching a wild animal you didn't want to startle. As he walked out, he was already dialing. "Sergeant Major," he whispered when the line clicked open. "You're not going to believe this, but I think Sticky Six is in our chow hall." Silence heavy, dangerous. "When did you see her?" came the low reply. "Just now, Captain Mitchell is," he swallowed. "He's trying to escort her out for no ID." Another long silence. "Keep eyes on them," the sergeant major said. "Don't intervene. The colonel and I are on our way." 5 minutes. 5 minutes for a man's career to either survive or evaporate. Inside the mess hall, Mitchell puffed up, sensing eyes on him, mistaking attention for authority instead of warning. He motioned for Alexis to walk ahead of him. She didn't move. He reached for her elbow. And that was the moment the room shifted. Because Alexis didn't pull back, she didn't flinch, she didn't even look at his hand. She simply raised her eyes, calm, steady, and the air changed. A stillness. The kind of stillness before a storm breaks. Mitchell hesitated. "She didn't." "You do not want to touch me, Captain." 3 lieutenants stopped eating. A corporal whispered, "Oh, he's dead." Someone else muttered a prayer. The room wasn't loud anymore. It was waiting. Mitchell opened his mouth, but the words never came. Because that was when the door swung open. The scrape of 100 chairs as Marines rose to their feet echoed across the room like a single command. Colonel Brennan strode in with Sergeant Major Thorne and Major Evans flanking him, shoulders squared, jaws tight, eyes sharp and searching. Mitchell's face drained of color. He snapped to attention so hard his spine cracked. No one had briefed him for this. No one had told him the woman he dismissed was about to redefine every assumption he'd ever made. And no one had prepared him for the truth. He hadn't been confronting a civilian. He had been challenging a legend. A ghost. A woman whose name was spoken only in rooms with closed doors and classified stamps. And now the storm had finally arrived. How do you apologize to someone you underestimated before you even knew their name? That was the question tightening the air as Colonel Brennan stopped 3 feet from Alexis Hartley, spine straight, jaw set, every Marine in the mess hall holding a breath that suddenly felt too heavy. Mitchell didn't exist to the room anymore. All eyes were on the woman he had dismissed, the woman everyone else now stood for. Colonel Brennan brought his hand up in a crisp salute, sharper, deeper, more deliberate than the one he gave generals. "Major Hartley," he said, voice steady but carrying something close to reverence. "Welcome to Miramar. I owe you an apology." The mess hall didn't move. Not a cough, not a chair scrape, nothing. Alexis returned the salute with calm professionalism. Nothing proud, nothing smug, just the quiet dignity of someone who had been saluted by men who had bled beside her, and by some who never came home. "Colonel," she said softly, "no apology needed. I was just having lunch." But Brennan shook his head. "No, ma'am, an apology is necessary." He turned his gaze to Captain Mitchell. It wasn't anger in his eyes. It was disappointment, sharpened into something far more dangerous. "You were following procedures, Captain?" Brennan asked, voice so calm it made the back of Mitchell's neck prickle. "Yes, sir," Mitchell stammered. I believed she was." "You believed," Brennan interrupted, instead of looking. A muscle in Mitchell's jaw twitched. "You saw a woman in civilian clothes," Brennan continued, "and you assumed, you judged, and you insulted a decorated officer from a sister service." He stepped aside, motioning toward her jacket, specifically the patch. That costume patch you mocked, that is a JSOC detachment insignia. They don't sell those on eBay. They don't hand them out at air shows. They are earned, and often paid for. Mitchell's knees threatened to buckle. But Brennan wasn't finished. He raised his voice, not yelling, just projecting with a commander's authority. Some of you may have heard stories, he began, letting the silence stretch, about a pilot, a woman, who refused to abandon her wingman after a SAM strike crippled his aircraft deep inside hostile territory. A few Marines nodded slowly. A whisper rose and died. She circled above him for nearly an hour, Brennan continued. Fuel leaking, hydraulics failing, enemy fire climbing like a ladder toward her. Alexis lowered her gaze, not out of shame, but out of memory. The room grew softer, quieter, the kind of quiet reserved for funerals and revelations. That pilot, Brennan said, stepping closer to her, talked a terrified young aviator through emergency procedures while her own cockpit filled with smoke. She coordinated rescue birds, suppressed ground fire, and refused, absolutely refused, to break formation. He paused, eyes meeting hers. Because she had his six, no matter what. Mitchell swallowed hard, throat tight. The jet she flew back, Brennan said, was soaked in JP-8, sticky, fuel dripping down the fuselage, explosive, one spark and it should have gone up in fire. A whisper traveled through the room, Sticky 6. And she still brought him home, both of them alive. He let the final word sit heavy. So yes, Brennan finished quietly, she has a call sign. He stepped back. Sticky 6, one of the finest pilots to ever fly for SOCOM. Mitchell's face went blank, hollow. He wasn't standing at attention anymore. He was holding himself upright out of pure instinct. Brennan dismissed him with a single word. Captain. Mitchell flinched. Why, yes, sir. Leave. He left, not quickly, not slowly, just gone. The room watched him walk out, not with triumph or smugness, but with a silent understanding. A lesson was unfolding in real time. When he was gone, the colonel turned to Alexis, his sternness melting into genuine respect. Major, we would be honored to escort you to the O Club. She shook her head softly. Unnecessary, Colonel, truly. Her voice wasn't cold, just tired. The kind of tired that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying stories you couldn't tell, loss you couldn't voice, missions that took pieces of you no one could see. Major Evans stepped forward, eyes warm, almost protective. If there's anything you need. Just understanding, Alexis said quietly. For everyone, same standard, same respect. No one should assume they know a warrior just by looking at them. A murmur of agreement swept the hall, because every Marine in that room had judged someone by a uniform once, or by the lack of one. Alexis gave a small nod and turned to leave. But as she walked toward the door, a flash of memory hit her, not gently, but like a breath she'd been holding for years suddenly releasing. Smoke. Crackling warnings. The hydraulic stick vibrating in her hand like it wanted to break free. Her wingman's voice shaking. I'm losing it, Alexis, I'm losing. Stay with me, she had whispered, forcing her voice to stay steady even as the cockpit lights blinked red. I've got you. I'm not leaving your six. Sticky. She had hated the name at first. It felt like a reminder of the chaos, the fear. The moment she thought she was going to die, thought they both were. But then she remembered the look on her wingman's face when they landed, the tears he tried to hide, the way he whispered, "You didn't leave me, you really didn't." Six. Because she stayed behind him, with him for him. Even if it meant burning alive. The memory loosened its grip as she reached the door. She exhaled slowly, grounding herself the way therapists had taught her, a soft inhale, a longer exhale. Outside the mess hall, the sunlight felt too bright, too clean compared to the darker sky etched into her memory. She blinked against it, letting the warmth settle into her bones. Sergeant Major Thorne stepped beside her, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, for what it's worth, you handled that better than most." She offered a faint smile. "Experience." He nodded. "If the colonel had gotten here 30 seconds later." "I would have shown my ID," she finished. "Nothing more." But they both knew the truth. 30 more seconds and Mitchell's mistake might have turned physical, and Alexis was trained far beyond the average contractor or random visitor. But she didn't want that. She never wanted that. She wanted peace. Quiet. A moment to breathe without being measured. Yet trouble always seemed to find her, even in a mess hall, just trying to finish grilled chicken and pretend she was regular. "Major," Thorne said gently, "I know we ask a lot of ghosts to walk among us. Thank you for your patience today." Ghosts. That was what JSOC pilots became after long enough. Their stories vanished into black folders and sealed rooms, their faces forgotten until someone recognized the patch or the posture that didn't match the clothes. She nodded once and walked away. Not with pride. Not with triumph. With a quiet heaviness she'd grown used to. Because the truth was simple. Being underestimated wasn't new. Being unseen wasn't new. Being judged before being known wasn't new. What was new was how tired she felt of proving herself. She wasn't angry at Mitchell. She was tired for him. For all the ones who still needed to learn what Brennan had just shown an entire room. You never know the battles someone has already fought just by looking at them. And sometimes the strongest warrior in the room is the one eating alone in a blue blouse, trying not to be noticed. What happens when the past you've buried starts knocking again, quiet at first, then louder until you can't ignore it? That was the question that lingered with Alexis long after she stepped out of the mess hall. It followed her down the walkway, into the warmth of the afternoon sun, through the steady hum of aircraft taxiing in the distance. She kept walking, boots slow, mind restless. Everyone at Miramar now knew who she was. But none of them knew what she carried. Even in the shadow of respect, assumptions were still there, unspoken but present. To them she was Sticky Six, the pilot who refused to abandon her wingman, a hero wrapped in mystery, a legend whispered about in ready rooms. But legends rarely tell the truth. The truth was far quieter, far heavier. A truth she still hadn't spoken aloud. She paused near the flight line, watching a pair of hornets rise into the sky. The rumble vibrated through her chest, familiar, comforting in a way that only pilots understood. But she didn't step closer, didn't approach the hangar, didn't let the old instinct pull her toward the smell of jet fuel and burnt rubber. Instead, she sat on a bench facing the runway, elbows on knees, eyes tracking the fatting silhouettes in the distance. She didn't notice Major Evans' approach until he cleared his throat softly. "May I?" he asked. She nodded, sliding over slightly, not because she needed space, but because old habits never died. Always give someone enough room. Always know your exits. Evans sat beside her, hands clasped between his knees. He didn't look at her at first. "You handled all that with a lot more grace than some of us would have," he said quietly. Alexis gave a tired smile. "You learn to pick your battles." Evans chuckled lightly. "Some battles pick you." She didn't respond, couldn't. The words hit too close. Evans finally turned his head, studying her profile. Calm, still, too still. "Can I ask you something, ma'am, off the record?" She hesitated, but nodded. "There's something in your file," he said carefully. "Something the colonel didn't talk about in there. Something blacked out. Something we've all heard rumors about." Her jaw tightened, very slightly, but Evans saw it. He continued, softer this time. "Are you here to brief us, or are you here because of that mission?" Alexis didn't answer immediately. She watched the horizon instead, as if the clouds held the explanation she didn't want to give. Both, she said finally. Evans nodded, patient. But the part you're asking about, she paused, exhaling slowly. No, I'm not here to talk about that. He didn't press. He didn't need to. The hesitation in her voice revealed more than any report could. There were two missions in her past. The one everyone celebrated, and the one no one talked about. Evans waited, still and quiet, letting the air settle. You don't have to tell me, he said gently. But if you ever choose to, there are people here who'll listen. She appreciated that more than she let show. But some stories weren't meant to be shared. Some were meant to be carried. She stood, stretching her back slowly, the years of flying still knotted in her shoulders. I have to prepare for the brief, she said. Evans stood with her. If you need anything. She shook her head with a small smile. I'm fine, Major. But she wasn't fine, she knew it. Evans knew it, the air knew it. Yet pretending was easier. Pretending was safer. She walked toward the operations building. With each step, the past clawed its way closer. Not the sanitized version Brennan had told in the mess hall, but the true version. The one buried under redaction bars. The one that still woke her up some nights. She pushed open the door to the briefing room. Empty, quiet. Good. She needed the silence. She set down her notes and stared at the blank projector screen. It wasn't fear that made her throat tighten. It was memory. The SAM strike. The screaming alarm. The violent jolt. Her wingman shouting, I'm hit, oh God, Alexis. The sky spinning. The hydraulic lines bursting. The smell of burning fluid. Her own fuel gauge dropping faster than any textbook had prepared her for. The way the jet shuddered like it wanted to tear itself apart. That wasn't the part she avoided. It was what came next. Her wingman's breathing, ragged, panicked. I can't keep her steady. Don't think about the ground, she told him. Think about me. Alexis, what if I? You're not dying today, not on my watch. But if I go, then I go. Silence. She hadn't meant to say it. It wasn't procedure. It wasn't tactical. It wasn't smart. But it was real. The sky had gone unnaturally still after that, as if even the mountains were listening. For a moment she remembered what fear felt like, raw, choking, absolute. Not for herself, for him. If he punched out, he'd land in hostile terrain. If she stayed, she'd burn with him in the sky. She chose him anyway. She always wondered if that made her brave or reckless. She clenched her jaw, grounding herself back in the briefing room. No smoke, no screaming, no alarms, just silence. She didn't hear the soft footsteps until someone paused at the door. Ma'am. It was Sergeant Major Thorne. She turned, Sergeant Major. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him gently. Not to trap, just to give privacy. I wanted to check on you, he said. You looked somewhere else when you left the mess hall. She nodded. I was. You're not obligated to tell me where, he said, but I get the sense there's more to your story than the colonel shared. There it was again, that quiet invitation, that gentle opening, and again she felt the urge to deflect. But Thorne wasn't asking out of curiosity. He was asking out of concern, genuine, grounded worry. I'm fine, she said softly. He didn't believe her. But he didn't push. Ma'am, he said, some of the bravest people I've met are the ones who say that when they're anything but. Alexis stared at the blank screen, then at the table, then finally at him. Sergeant Major, the mission Brennan talked about, it wasn't the last one. Thorne inhaled slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly. And the last one, she continued, voice tightening, didn't go the same way. He didn't ask what happened, didn't need to. She looked down at her hands, steady, controlled, strong. Hands that had once gripped a shaking flight stick slick with hydraulic fluid. hands that had saved one aviator and couldn't save another. There were 2 jets, she whispered, 2 wingmen, one lived. Her voice cracked just once, but enough for Thorne to understand. You brought one home, he said gently, and lost the other. She nodded, swallowing hard, and I still hear both of them. Silence, not heavy, not suffocating, just human. Thorne moved one step closer, keeping a respectful distance. Ma'am, you're here for a reason. Maybe it's not just to brief us. Maybe it's to heal something you've carried alone too long. She blinked, eyes burning, not with tears but with the effort of holding them back. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was tired of carrying everything alone. But healing required something she hadn't had the courage to face yet. Forgiveness. Not from others. From herself. Sergeant Major, she said finally, voice steadier than she felt, I'm not here to be a hero. I'm here to do a job. He nodded with quiet respect. Then let us help you do it. He turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. For what it's worth, he said gently, both of them would be proud of you. Her breath hitched, too quick, too sharp. He left. The room fell silent again. She pressed her palms against the table, grounding herself. She wasn't ready to tell her full story. Not yet. But the ghosts were awake now. And they weren't going back to sleep. Especially not with the briefing coming. Because tomorrow morning, she would stand in front of the entire squadron. And she knew one thing with absolute certainty. They would hear the call sign, Sticky 6. But they would have no idea what it truly cost her to earn it. What do you do when the thing you fear most isn't the enemy but your own memory? That was the question pressing against Alexis's ribs as she stepped into the briefing room the next morning. The space buzzed with low conversation, Marines settling into seats, pilots scanning handouts, officers talking quietly near the front. Their eyes shifted when she entered. But this time, the weight was different. Not curiosity. Not judgment. Something closer to reverence and wariness. Because respect comes easy when you hear the heroic version of someone's story. But respect doesn't mean understanding. She didn't want reverence, she wanted room to breathe. She set her folder at the podium, ignoring the whispers. That's her. Sticky 6. The one from the rescue mission. No, there's another mission, something they classified heavy. Yeah, I heard. Don't, seriously, don't. Alexis inhaled slowly. She didn't need the flashback starting before she even opened her mouth. Major Evans approached, expression steady but carrying a question she wasn't ready to answer. You good? He asked. I'm here, she replied. Good enough. He stepped aside as the room settled into silence. The colonel walked in last, nodding to her before addressing the squadron. Ladies and gentlemen, this morning's Joint Operations briefing will be led by Major Alexis Hartley from Air Force Special Operations. He glanced at her, encouraging, not commanding. The floor is yours, Major. She stepped forward, hands resting lightly on the podium, not gripping it, not hiding behind it, just grounding. Good morning, she began, voice even. Before we start, I want to clarify something. The room stilled. You might have heard a story about a mission where I stayed with my wingman under fire until rescue arrived. A few heads nodded. That happened, she said, but that story alone does not define me, and it's not why I'm here. Quiet, controlled, measured. She clicked the remote. A map appeared, mountain ranges, flight paths, red zones, technical, impersonal. This briefing is about joint air-ground integration, she continued. What we do when communications fail, when birds go down, when terrain turns rescue into a race against time. But her voice wavered, only slightly, when she said the word rescue. She hoped no one noticed. But someone did. Sergeant Major Thorne, sitting near the front, watched her with the eyes of a man who'd seen too many people try to push through pain by pretending it wasn't there. She pressed forward. "You all know procedures," she said. "Today we talk about what happens when procedures break apart." Another slide. Another diagram. Her voice was steady. But her hands weren't fully steady. She kept them resting against the podium, so no one would see the tremble. Halfway through the briefing, she switched to a diagram showing a downed aircraft scenario, terrain, enemy positions, rescue approach patterns. As soon as the image appeared, her heartbeat stuttered. Because she knew this place, not from simulations, not from training. From that night. Cold mountains. No moon. A sky so dark it felt like drowning. Her chest tightened. She gripped the edge of the podium, nails digging in. She wasn't supposed to talk about that mission. But if she was going to teach them anything real, anything useful, she had to go there. "Sometimes," she said, voice quieter now, "you have two wingmen." The room shifted. "And sometimes, you don't bring them both home." Silence spread like frost. Evans's expression softened, concern rising beneath his attempt to stay neutral. Brennan leaned forward slightly, reading her body language. Thorne's jaw tightened. She continued before she lost her nerve. "There was an operation," she said. "Location aside, the conditions were impossible. Communications were broken. Terrain was hostile, weather deteriorating." She swallowed. "And the enemy was waiting for us." A few pilots straightened. Stories like this weren't in the sanitized mission logs. "My second wingman, call sign Lancer, took a hit. Bad hit. Not like Sticky 6 mission. This one was catastrophic. He lost hydraulics, flight controls, navigation, everything." Her voice went thinner, softer. "He was going down, we both knew it." The room didn't breathe. She stared at the map, but she wasn't seeing it anymore. She was seeing him. Lancer. Dark hair. Stubborn smile. Always humming some old country song in the cockpit during long flights. She blinked hard. "He radioed me," she said, "and he sounded calm, too calm. The kind of calm someone uses when they've accepted something you're not ready to accept." A few Marines shifted uncomfortably. "I tried everything," she said. "Every maneuver, every backup procedure, every command, nothing worked." Her voice caught just once. "He wouldn't eject," she whispered. "Why not?" someone almost asked, but the question died in the silence. "He didn't trust the terrain," she said. "Didn't think he'd survive the landing zone. He believed staying with the aircraft gave him a better chance." Her jaw clenched. "It didn't." A tremor ran through her hand. She curled it into a fist. "That night," she continued, "I flew lower than I ever have, below safe limits, below common sense. I tried to guide him through manual controls." A pause, long, heavy. "He hit the ridge." Not loud, not dramatic, just the truth. No one moved. No whisper. No cough. No shifting chair. Just silence. "He didn't make it," she said, voice barely audible. "And I couldn't save him." Her throat tightened. She forced air into her lungs. "And for a long time, I believed that meant I failed him." Brennan exhaled softly, a sound of understanding, not pity. Thorne lowered his eyes, giving her the privacy of grief even in a room full of people. Evans looked down at his own hands. She continued. "Afterward, the debrief labeled it unavoidable. I was told I did everything right, everything possible." She looked up, eyes shining but dry. "But that doesn't erase what it feels like to lose someone who trusted you." The room absorbed that, not as a story but as a lesson, a truth no checklist could prepare them for. She closed the slide. "When I talk about joint rescue procedures," she said quietly, "I'm not reading from a manual. I'm speaking from experience. from the moments where theory falls apart and choices hurt. A long silence followed. Then she stepped back from the podium. She didn't need to say more. Brennan stood, clearing his throat. "Thank you, Major Hartley." His voice was gentle, respectful, protective. The room rose to its feet. Not because she was a hero, because she was human. The colonel dismissed everyone, but many lingered, soft glances, quiet nods, nothing loud or invasive. Respectful distance. As Alexis gathered her notes, Major Evans approached, worry written plainly across his face. "You didn't have to share that," he said softly. "Yes," she replied, "I did." "Why?" She took a slow breath. "Because the truth matters more than the myth." Evans studied her, something shifting in his expression, deeper understanding, deeper respect. "You know," he said, "most people think strength means winning every fight." She shook her head. "Strength," she said, "means living with the ones you couldn't." He didn't respond. He just nodded, slow, solemn. Thorne approached next, hands behind his back, voice gentle. "Ma'am," he said, "Lancer would have been proud of what you did today." Her eyes closed for a moment. A soft exhale escaped her. "Maybe," she whispered, "one day I'll believe that." "And until you do," Thorne said, "we'll believe it for you." He stepped away, letting her breathe. Finally, the room emptied, leaving Alexis alone with the fatting echoes of chairs and footsteps. She stood there, steady but tired, so very tired. Because telling the story was one thing. Living with it was another. And tomorrow, she would face something even harder. She would face Mitchell again. Not as the officer who insulted her. Not as the man who underestimated her. But as someone who needed to learn the lesson she had nearly died to understand. Respect isn't about rank or uniform. It's about seeing the human being beneath it. And she wasn't done teaching it yet. What does it take for a person to truly change? Not a reprimand, not embarrassment, not even punishment. Real change takes something far heavier, seeing yourself through the eyes of someone you hurt. That was the lesson Captain Ryan Mitchell was learning in real time as he walked across the base the morning after Alexis's briefing. He wasn't walking with confidence now. No swagger, no audience, no lieutenant snickering at his side, just a man alone with the echo of his own mistakes. Every Marine he passed gave him a look, not cruel, not mocking, just aware. The way you look at someone who touched a stove after being warned. The way you look at someone facing consequences they earned themselves. Mitchell hated it. Not because it bruised his pride, but because he knew why they were looking. He deserved it. He reached the doorway of the professional conduct office, the place he'd been reassigned to temporarily. Everyone knew what that meant, accountability with a polite name. Inside, papers were stacked neatly on desks. PowerPoint slides waited on a screen. Training manuals were open. He had begun building the curriculum he'd been ordered, no, entrusted, to create. "Re-educate them," the colonel had said. "Teach them the standard," the sergeant major added. "Starting with yourself," Major Evans told him privately. Mitchell rubbed his face, exhaustion pressing behind his eyes. He had slept maybe 2 hours. The rest of the night had been replaying every word, every gesture, every assumption he made about Alexis Hartley. He didn't understand how he missed it, her bearing, her calm, the weight behind her eyes. But the truth was simpler, more painful. He hadn't tried to see her. A knock pulled him from his thoughts. Master Gunnery Sergeant Cole stepped in, expression unreadable. "You're late, Captain," Cole said. "No heat, just fact." "I know," Mitchell replied. Cole crossed his arms. "You ready?" Mitchell looked at the stacks of papers, lesson plans, policy quotes, scripted teaching notes, all organized, precise, but shallow, technical. He shook his head. "No, but I'm here." Cole studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Good, let's get to work." They spent the morning drafting scenarios, rewriting modules, scraping away the sterile checkbox approach the previous training used. For the first time in his career, Mitchell asked questions instead of pretending he already knew the answers. What does respect look like when it's not obvious? How do you teach someone to recognize quiet authority? What does bias look like in real time, not hypothetically? Cole answered each one slowly, deliberately. If you want them to care, Captain, you have to give them something real. Something real. Mitchell knew exactly what that meant. He set down his pen. We need her story. Cole's eyebrows rose. You want the major involved. Mitchell shook his head immediately. No, she owes me nothing, but we can reference her case, what happened yesterday, not her missions, not her file, just the lesson. Cole nodded. Respect flickered in his expression. That's the first smart thing you've said in a while. Mitchell exhaled, half laugh, half defeat. Feels overdue. Hours passed. By the time they took a break, the weight in Mitchell's chest had grown heavier but cleaner, like a wound being washed. He stepped outside for air, leaning against the railing, staring at the runway where jets roared into the sky. The sound used to comfort him. Today it felt like judgment. That was when he saw her. Alexis. Walking across the tarmac toward the BX, her pace slow, mind somewhere else entirely. He froze. He hadn't expected to see her again so soon, and even though he'd rehearsed apologies in his mind, the real moment knocked them all loose. He watched her step into the shade of the walkway. For a second, just a second, she looked small, not weak, not fragile, just human, carrying something heavy. Something invisible to most, but no longer invisible to him. He took a breath, pushed off the railing and walked toward her. No swagger, no performance, just honesty. Ma'am, he said quietly. She looked up, her expression didn't harden, didn't soften, it stayed neutral, measured. Captain Mitchell. He straightened unconsciously, not out of fear but out of respect. I'd like to apologize, he said, properly this time. She didn't speak, she didn't nod, she simply gave him space to continue. He swallowed. What I did was unprofessional, disrespectful, ignorant. I made assumptions that had nothing to do with protocol and everything to do with my own ego. Still, she said nothing. Her silence wasn't cold, it was patient. I needed to say that to your face, he continued. Not because someone told me to, because you deserve that. At last she spoke. Why now? She asked softly. He hesitated. Because yesterday, when I saw the colonel salute you, when I understood who you were, I realized I wasn't just wrong about your position or your access. I was wrong about something deeper. She waited. I didn't see you, he said. I saw who I assumed you were. Her expression softened just slightly. A shift in the eyes, not forgiveness but acknowledgement. He continued, voice quieter. I want to be better than that, and I'm trying. A long pause stretched between them, not tense, just honest. Thank you, Captain, she said finally. Apology accepted. Relief broke across his features. Not dramatic, not desperate, just a man letting go of something he'd carried since yesterday. But she wasn't finished. Mitchell, she added gently, respect isn't something you learn once and then you're done. He straightened again. I know. It's a practice, she said, a daily choice for everyone, even me. Her eyes flickered, pain, memory, regret, something deeper. He saw it, didn't comment, didn't pry. And that alone showed how much he'd grown. I'm rebuilding the training, he said, using what happened yesterday as an example, not a story about rank but about awareness, bias, perspective. Good, she said, teach them to see beyond the surface. He nodded. If you ever want to be involved, or if you think I'm missing something. She shook her head gently. You can handle it. Then, after a moment, but I appreciate the offer. He took a small step back, giving her space again. Thank you, ma'am, for the grace you showed me. I didn't deserve it. No one deserves grace, she said quietly. That's why it matters. Her words hit something inside him he didn't know needed breaking. She turned to leave, but he asked one last question, cautious, respectful. Ma'am, yesterday during your briefing, you mentioned a second wingman. The air tightened. She turned back slowly. Yes, she said. Do you ever talk about him? A long silence. Then she shook her head once, not often. Would it help? He asked gently. Her eyes held his, calm, steady but shadowed. Not yet, she said. He nodded, accepting the answer without pushing. I'm here, he said quietly, surprising even himself with the sincerity of it. She didn't smile, but her expression changed, softened, an acknowledgement that he meant it. Thank you, Captain, she said. She walked away, leaving him standing in the sunlight, feeling something unfamiliar. Not shame, not guilt, something like responsibility. And for the first time in his career, Mitchell realized that respect wasn't a rule written in manuals. It was a way of seeing the world. He watched her disappear into the BX, and the thought surfaced before he could stop it. She's carrying more than medals, more than stories, more than the myths people whisper. She's carrying ghosts. And she's carrying them alone. But maybe not for much longer. Because change doesn't happen in a room. It happens in moments like this. One humbled officer at a time. One corrected assumption at a time. One quiet apology at a time. What happens after the apology? After the anger fades, the shock passes, and the dust finally settles. Most stories end when the conflict ends, but real life doesn't. Real healing doesn't. It continues in the quiet moments that follow, the moments no one writes down. That was where Alexis Hartley found herself weeks later, sitting under the shade of an old sprawling tree near the edge of the base. It was late afternoon, sunlight slanting across the ground in warm amber strokes. A light breeze brushed her hair. Aircraft rumbled in the distance, steady, familiar, comforting. She closed her eyes and breathed. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't a forced breath. It was a real one. Because something had shifted. Not everything, not instantly, not magically, but enough. Enough that the air didn't feel quite so heavy. Enough that she didn't feel quite so alone. Footsteps approached quietly from the path behind her, not rushed, not hesitant, just steady. She opened her eyes to see Sergeant Major Thorne approaching, hands tucked behind his back. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said. "Sergeant Major." He nodded toward the empty space beside her bench. "May I?" She gestured for him to sit. He took a seat with the kind of slow, deliberate movement that older warriors earned after years of deployments. His gaze rested on the distant runway. "Heard you talked with Captain Mitchell again earlier this week." She exhaled a soft laugh. "He's trying." "That he is." Thorne leaned back. "You did more for him in 5 minutes than any training module ever could." Alexis smiled faintly. "I didn't do anything." "Oh, you did," Thorne said. "You held up a mirror. Not everyone likes what they see in one." He wasn't wrong. Mitchell was different now. Not perfect. Not transformed into a saint, but different, more aware, more grounded, more willing to listen. And that was enough. Thorne rested his elbows on his knees. "Major, I've been thinking about something you said in your briefing." "Which part?" "The part about losing one wingman and saving the other." A familiar ache tightened in her chest. "What about it?" "You spoke like someone carrying blame that doesn't belong to you." She stared straight ahead. The breeze lifted her hair. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel, dust, and heat. "Sergeant Major, I was his flight lead, his mentor, his friend." She paused. "I should have saved him." Thorne shook his head. "You think you're the only one who's ever felt that. Every senior NCO, every officer, every team leader, hell, every Marine who's been in the wrong place at the wrong time carries someone with them. Some carry one, some carry many. I was responsible for him, she said. You were responsible for trying, Thorne replied gently, not for controlling the universe. She didn't respond, couldn't. He continued, quiet and steady. The measure of a warrior isn't whether they saved everyone, it's whether they kept going after the ones they couldn't. Her breath hitched, not because she hadn't heard sentiments like that before, but because this time it didn't feel like comfort. It felt like truth. He stood slowly, joint stiff, stretching his back. Walk with me. She nodded and rose, falling into step beside him as they moved along the path. The base stretched quiet before them, sailors heading to chow, a group of Marines marching toward evening formation, a pilot jogging past with a checklist in hand. Life moving forward. Always forward. Thorne kept his pace easy. Ma'am, if I may, the way you carry yourself, that calm, that stillness, he paused. It's admirable, but it also tells me there's a storm behind it. Alexis didn't deny it. What happened with your second wingman, Thorne continued, that's not a failure, it's a scar. And scars aren't signs of weakness. They're signs you survived something that should have broken you. She swallowed hard. Sometimes I don't feel like I survived it. He nodded, not surprised. Some losses take years to catch up to you. They reached the overlook near the hangars. Sunset bled across the horizon in soft oranges and deep purples. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Thorne said, "You know he wouldn't want you carrying this alone." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I know. But you are," he added. "You don't talk about him, you don't tell the story. You keep it contained like classified intel. And maybe that worked for a while." She closed her eyes. "But it's leaking now," he said. "And that's okay, that means you're ready." A long silence hung between them. Then she said something she hadn't said out loud in years. "I miss him." Thorne nodded. "Of course you do. I should have been able to save him." "Major," Thorne's voice softened, "you saved the one you could, and you stayed with the one you couldn't. No one can ask for more than that." Tears threatened at the corners of her eyes, not streaming, not dramatic, just present. She wiped them gently. He pretended not to notice. They stood together in the fading light, letting the moment pass without forcing it into something bigger than it needed to be. Finally, Thorne said, "You're doing something important here, not just for us, for yourself." She looked at him. "You're teaching people to see beyond uniforms, beyond first impressions, beyond ego." He paused. "You're teaching people to see the human being standing in front of them." She breathed out slowly. "Feels like a small thing." "No," he said, "it's the biggest thing." They walked back toward the main buildings as evening settled, soft and cool. Along the way, they passed Captain Mitchell, sleeves rolled tight and a binder under his arm. When he saw her, he stopped. "Ma'am," he said with quiet respect. Alexis nodded. "Captain." He looked at Thorne, then back at her, gathering courage. "I finished the new training module. I'd like you to see it if you're willing." She studied him, not his rank, not his posture, not his neatly pressed uniform. She looked at him as a person. A man trying to grow. A man trying to do better. And she nodded. "Send it to my inbox." He looked stunned by the simple yes. "Thank you, ma'am." He walked away and Thorne smirked softly. "You know, people don't change because they're punished. They change because someone shows them who they could be." "He changed himself," she said. "You gave him the reason to try." She didn't argue. Night began settling over Miramar. The sky deepened into navy, stars flickering faintly above the hangars. Alexis stopped near her quarters, turning to Thorne. "Sergeant Major, thank you for everything." "Just doing my job, ma'am." "No," she said softly, "this was more than that." He dipped his head in acknowledgement and walked off, leaving her alone in the warm evening air. She inhaled deeply. This time it didn't hurt. This time the air felt clear. She felt the weight on her shoulders, not gone but lighter, manageable, carried together instead of alone. She looked up at the first star visible in the twilight. For a moment she imagined her fallen wingman standing beside her, not haunting, not accusing, just watching the sky with her the way he used to. She whispered, "I didn't forget you." A soft breeze answered, not magical, not mystical, but gentle. Like permission. Like release. She smiled, faint, almost invisible but real. And as she walked inside, she carried with her the quiet truth she had finally earned. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And sometimes the greatest strength a warrior can show is learning how to let go without forgetting. The ghosts would always walk with her, but they didn't have to lead. She did.